Welcome to Our Vices, a short program exploring the vice presidency in 3 simple questions. Question number 1. How did John Tyler become vice president? Born in the year 1790 to a well-to-do plantation-owning family in Virginia, John Tyler's family belonged to the same upper crust of the Old Dominion as Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. Tyler studied law at William and Mary, then practiced under the tutelage of his father and later under Edmund Randolph, our first Attorney General, his father becoming governor of Virginia. At the tender age of 19, Tyler passed the bar, and by 21, Tyler became a state legislator. Toward the tail end of 1816, Tyler won a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, getting his first taste of national politics. Tyler could be identified today as a Democratic Republican, which nearly everyone was during the era of good feelings. But Tyler found himself mostly bored and frustrated with the work of being a representative, and the low pay beneath the needs of his growing family, and in 1820 returned to private practice, re-entering the state legislature in 1823, and by appointment of that legislature in 1825, he found himself governor of Virginia. Tyler, as governor, famously spoke at Thomas Jefferson's funeral. Tyler, like many, pined for a return of old Jeffersonian republicanism, in a time when the influence of the dissolved Federalist Party seemed to corrupt the splintering Democratic Republicans. It is no surprise, then, that after winning a seat in the Senate in 1827, Tyler came to identify with the emerging party of Jacksonian Democrats, which sought to revive Jeffersonianism. But Tyler was an uneasy Democrat, and personally had distaste for Andrew Jackson, which only grew as Jackson proved to be no guardian of states' rights. With his disassociation from the party, Tyler knew the Democrat-controlled Virginia legislature would not give him another term in the Senate. Tyler resigned in 1836. At this point, Tyler fell in line with the emerging party in opposition to Andrew Jackson and his Democrats, the Whig Party, which in the election of 1836 still remained a weak coalition of politicians. As such, in the 1836 election, the Whigs chose a novel strategy of running a series of regional candidates for president and vice president, hopefully popular enough in each section of the country to collectively deprive Martin Van Buren, the Democratic candidate, an electoral majority. Then, through deals, the Whig candidates would settle on a president and vice president. John Tyler was a natural pick for a vice presidential candidate from the South. Also running would be Whig candidate Francis Granger from New York, hoping to scoop up the northern vote. Not the worst strategy that could be devised, however, Martin Van Buren won his majority, and Richard Mentor Johnson was awarded the vice presidency by the Senate after the Virginia Democrats withheld their electoral votes from Johnson. Tyler finished third for vice president. After this, Tyler returned to state politics a defeated man. Tyler struggled without success to regain a Senate seat, but in 1839, Tyler joined the Virginia delegation heading to the Whig convention for the 1840 election. William Henry Harrison had a strong bid at the convention to nab the presidential nomination. Harrison was a Westerner, and despite his roots, Southerners also saw him as a bit of a Northerner. The delegates believed a Southerner as vice president would be necessary to balance the ticket. Notably, the Democrats were running Martin Van Buren, a Northerner, and Johnson, a Westerner and suspected abolitionist, despite being a slave owner. Having a Southerner could do the trick this time. A number of candidates declined the nomination until it fell to none other than John Tyler, who won the nomination on the first ballot. The 1840 campaign became known as the Log Cabin Campaign, as each candidate tried to don an everyman persona. War hero William Henry Harrison did this far easier than his opponent Martin Van Buren, despite Harrison's elitist background. John Tyler adhered to the older tradition of having others campaign in your name, and initially did not campaign until he received news that Vice President Richard Mentor Johnson was taking engagements, showing off battle wounds, and telling the tale of how he killed Shawnee Chief Tecumseh. Harrison and Tyler became Tippecanoe and Tyler too. The slogan was catchy, and reportedly, women found Tyler quite handsome. In the 1840 election, Tyler did not manage to secure Virginia. However, he can be credited with securing enough of the South that the Harrison-Tyler ticket won the day, securing 234 electoral votes to Van Buren's 60. Which brings us to question number 2. What did John Tyler accomplish during his time as vice president? Tyler took his oath March 4th, 1841. Afterwards, he gave a short 3-minute speech extolling the virtues of states' rights. He also attended Harrison's inauguration and later presided over the Senate for the confirmation of Harrison's cabinet nominations, in what came to be a 2-hour session. After this, he retired to Virginia. Tyler did not intend to be a very active vice president. Harrison did not seek recommendations from him, nor did he offer any. However, in early April, Tyler received a letter from the Secretary of State informing him that President Harrison was deathly ill. Harrison was an older man for the time and promised to only serve a single term, as he was not in the best of health generally. Tyler, for his part, remained in Virginia, finding it improper for him to rush to D.C. on the misfortunes of another. On April 5th, 1841, 2 men on horseback delivered the message to Tyler that the president had died. Tyler later said of this moment that he foresaw that I was called to a bed of thorns. No sitting president had ever passed away before, and the exact sequence of events that should follow and the precise role Tyler should now play remained debatable. Tyler rushed to Washington and took an oath publicly on April 6th. In the intervening time, Secretary Daniel Webster served as acting chief executive. The presidential cabinet informed Tyler that they intended to refer to him as Vice President, Acting President. Tyler rejected this title and insisted that he was, in fact, now the President of the United States. The conflict stems from the separate interpretations of the Constitution, which states, in case of the removal of the President from office, or of his death, resignation, or inability to discharge the powers and duties of the said office, the same shall devolve on the Vice President. The cabinet felt that the Vice President assumes the role of the President, but remained in title Vice President. Tyler saw differently, moved into the White House, and addressed himself as President of the United States. Former President John Quincy Adams then visited Tyler at the White House on April 16th, and was surprised that Tyler had assumed the title of President instead of, as Adams assumed, Vice President acting as President, which Adams considered the proper title. Indeed, segments of the public began referring to Tyler as His Excellency. On May 31st, 1841, the House votes on forming a congressional committee to communicate with the president. Congressman John McKeon of New York requested that the committee strike the word president from the resolution and replace it with Vice President, now exercising the office of President. The resolution passed, however, without the amendment. The House of Representatives had now officially referred to Tyler as President. The same legislation moved to the Senate, where Senator William Allen sought to replace President with the Vice President, on whom, by death of the late President, the powers and duties of the office of the President have devolved. In the ensuing debate, advocates for Tyler being president argued that if he were still vice president, he could still preside over the Senate and break ties in the Senate. It became clear that the framers of the Constitution did not intend for someone not elected president to now have the executive powers of the president and the legislative power of the vice president. Therefore, upon the power of the presidency devolving onto the vice president, it was proper that the office of the vice president should be vacated. And with that, the Senate now referred to Tyler as the president. And the matter, for all intents and purposes, was settled. Meaning, this episode has greatly overrun its purpose, as the nation now had no vice president. Which brings us to our last question. What legacy did John Tyler leave behind as vice president? Only being president for 33 or so days makes this part of the episode a little difficult, as Tyler cast no tie-breaking votes in the Senate, provided the president no advice, nor recommendations to appointments. However, Tyler, from his position as the elected vice president, and through sheer force of will, insisted that the vice president does indeed become the president upon the death of the president, despite the vague wording of the Constitution. This is an immensely important legacy we can place on the shoulders of Tyler. His view would become codified into Section 1 of the 25th Amendment, and is now the uncontested law of the land. Which brings us to the end of Season 1 of Our Vices, covering our first 10 vice presidents. We've seen the office of the vice presidency begin as a confusing and directionless role for an heir in waiting, such as Adams, to a position where presidents send their potential competitors to fall into obscurity, as we saw with George Clinton and Daniel Tompkins, into a role with newfound influence under John C. Calhoun and Martin Van Buren. And finally, with John Tyler, the office of the Vice Presidency elevates a man to the highest position in the land. There are many twists and turns in our story for Season 2. However, we will take a hiatus. Coincidentally, Tyler's presidency was also the longest period since the passing of our Constitution without a vice president. 3 years, 335 days. Hopefully, we will return before then. Thank you for listening.